A strange night at the UFC, well, strange afternoon at the UFC APEX is behind us. We had a main event change on the fly. We had a long day of fights. And Harry Powell and I are here on the Severe Takeaways to talk about it all. Greetings and salutations, everybody. You Spencer Kyte, friendly neighborhood Spencer man, at BJJ_Harry Powell in London town alongside me. And we're going to get through UFC Vegas 65. And I mean, listen, last week we sat down to do this and you could hear the excitement in our voices to talk about UFC 281 and everything that transpired. As we kick off this episode, you hear the dearth of excitement in my voice and the general facial expressions of Mr. Powell. This was a slog, folks. We said going in that this was a quintessential hangover card, maybe even like the worst possible hangover card. Just like, and it got worse. This was the hangover that somehow halfway through the day, when you thought you were maybe turning a corner, all of a sudden you started feeling worse again because we lost the main event between Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak. This was a rough one. Good sir. Overall thoughts just before we start getting into the fight by fight of this all. This was a tough one.
Imagine if the reason that Derek Lewis fell ill is because he was swimming through a swimming pool of custard. That's what it was like watching this fight card.
What kind of custard?
Derek Lewis flavored custard. Rough.
That would be rough custard. Yeah, this was... So the interesting thing about this as well is that early in the event, tweets started coming out from a couple different sources that were apparently at the Apex saying the main event is off. And we didn't get any confirmation until I feel like just before the main card was set to, like, towards the end of the prelims. And it just takes the air out of everything, because that fight between Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak was one of the few on this card that had real intrigue to it. It was the one where where's Derek Lewis at? Is Sergey Spivak ready to ascend? We're going to get an answer. And now we haven't gotten an answer. And instead of Derek Lewis and Sergey Spivak in the main event, and I think this is the thing, and this hadn't crossed my mind until literally just now, so this will be a work in progress idea. I think the thing that makes it more difficult and also speaks to where the UFC is at right now is that the second they had to pivot, they have the graphics ready and they start referring to it as UFC Fight Night Zachukwu versus Kutelaba. And it's like, wait, that's not what this is. This is UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Spivak, and that just got buggered. And it feels like the instant ability to pivot and instant ability to try to turn everything into the main event sort of speaks to where the UFC is at right now. Because as you and I have talked about online and offline, it's been a while since we've had a really great fight night. Now, I will say the one in 2 weeks' time in Orlando, Florida is outstanding. And the one towards the end of the year, the last card of the year with Sean Strickland and Jared Cannonier, has some good fights on it as well. But it's been a hot minute since we had a really good fight night card. And having these sorts of pivots and these sorts of instantly into what it now is kind of speaks to how this is becoming a churn that is becoming difficult for even the forever optimist in me to sit through and be like, all right, we're good.
A custard churn?
I do like custard.
Ugh, gross cunt. Like, look, this is all about media facade. When you look at large corporations, image is everything. It's actually far less about sustenance of content than content supporting image itself. And I think the point that you're making is that the UFC would rather look as if this was planned and try to look as if they have a shiny, polished exterior rather than humanize what happened on the night, which was something completely out of their control, something that was entirely unexpected in Derek Lewis being taken ill and not being able to fight, and wearing that on their sleeve and admitting to the fans, admitting to the viewers, admitting to the world that these things happen in MMA, which they do. And we've known that they do.
Right.
And, you know, the other side of this is it's like painting shit gold. It's still shit, you know?
Yeah.
And to me, we're going to get into this. This card was hot, steaming piles of garbage for a long, long time. And then there were elements of it that were great.
Yeah.
There were some really, really good fights. There were some good performances. We learned some things about some people. And, you know, there were portions of this fight card that were interesting. However, as I told you just before we started, you know, generally Sundays are my day off MMA, right? I try not to think or consume or be bothered by MMA at all. And on a Monday, I wake up earlier than usual and I sit at my PC and I begin to watch the fights. It's now late afternoon here in London. And as Spencer and I were about to start recording, I was still watching.
Yeah. So about an hour ago, you were still watching the final fight of this because you needed to take it in fits and starts.
Because, lads, it was rough enough. It was rough enough. That prelim portion was some of the worst shit I've seen in a long time. And let me explain what I mean by that, right? Because I think that this could sometimes get lost in the weeds. Something that can get lost in the weeds a little bit is that the reason why we're complaining about the UFC, the reason why we're talking negatively about the cards and about placements and timings and all of these sorts of things, actually isn't because we're just shitting on the UFC. If anything, it's like lamenting a breakup and what used to be or what could have been if situations had been different. And it feels a little bit like that. It feels as though if you've been in any relationship where one person makes a drastic change and you're not quite sure why and you can't really piece together why, and then even when you do piece together, it's very hard for you to come to terms with because that's completely different to your own set of ethics and philosophies, that's what we're looking at here. The UFC has changed from something that, whilst being a business and an attempt at monopolizing business, it was a business centered around fights and good fights and being the best in the world and all of these things. Now it's a media machine functioning under a contract from a far larger player. And I think that's where a lot of my disdain comes from, is that the fighters on the roster at the upper echelon are still the same. They're the same fighters that we know and love. But the way in which that they're interacting with the company, and as such, interacting with the portion of the sport that the company initiates and has control over, it's a product that we don't know, and it feels alien to us, and it feels subservient to what the UFC taught us the UFC was previously. And I'll finish this soliloquy on this, is that, again, this is something that can change. It's something that may not change. And I spoke about this months ago and had large conversations with Mr. Sheehan and Mr. Kyte and whoever else will listen, way back when I said that the UFC was falling off, and I think that this was going to be a time that the UFC was going to change. And both men made very logical arguments about why that wasn't going to be the case and why the UFC would always find their way back to prominence. I think the more that we watch this, and we'll touch on Cage Warriors, is the UFC are slipping more rapidly than we think. And I think the UFC are losing hardcore fans quicker than we think. And in the same way that in a jiu-jitsu gym, the white belts are the people that pay your bills, fine. But the culture and the core of your gym are those upper belts. And if the upper belts are leaving and sinking ship and jumping to other gyms and consuming other products, the UFC will become very hollow very quickly.
In a weird way, and it's certainly probably different where you are in terms of how you consume these fight cards. In a strange way, to me, it almost feels like the UFC needs to get back a little bit to the days when they had just started the Fox deal and there were shows on Fox and FX and Fuel TV and pay-per-views, and you sort of knew what each of those tiers represented. Pay-per-views were the absolute apex, to which they remain to this day, the best of the best for the most part. Then you got the Fox shows, which at a certain point became, you're getting a championship fight, and then you're getting 2 or 3 legitimate quality fights, and then good behind it. Sort of what we would qualify now as a really great fight night card. And then you're just sticking a title fight on top of it to make it take 2 weeks, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Kevin Holland card, stick a low popularity title fight on top of it. Usually it was Demetrius Johnson, and away we go. Then there was the FX cards, which were traditional fight nights. And then there was Fuel TV cards, which were these ones that we just had on Saturday. And everybody was like, everybody sort of knew what it meant. And so, oh, it's on Fuel, not that worried. Oh, it's on Fox, this will be good. And I think when you lose that and everything becomes so homogenous, it's hard to differentiate between the ones you really should get up for and the ones you don't necessarily need to. And everything is presented the exact same way. I say it all the time, watching UFC events and listening to sort of the way things are presented, right? When everyone is presented as being one fight away from a championship or one fight away from being on a run, then everybody is and no one is at the same time. And I think to what you're saying, if the UFC doesn't course correct a little here and recognize these things and say, we actually, despite our larger overall reach and probably audience, if we don't course correct, that's going to go away. That's going to continue to shrink because people will put more effort into Cage Warriors and Bellator and PFL and ONE and whoever else, or just abandon MMA. And that's not what you want if you are the global leader in MMA.
I agree. And you touched on Cage Warriors there. I think over the 2 shows they had last night, there was 1 decision. And that was a great fight. Really enjoyable. Really back and forth. Really action-packed between 2 fighters. And this is something that Ian Dean does so well, right? Is Morgan Charrier was on one side, and there was a gentleman called David Bivant, who I think has fought for Cage Warriors before, maybe, further down the line, but is a name that maybe many regional MMA fans don't know, and he brought in. And you know what? He was good. He was a good fighter. He made a great fight out of it. And it was a very, very close decision. I think it was a split decision win for Morgan Charrier. So, that's the art of matchmaking, right? The art of matchmaking is to bring in fighters that maybe people don't know and match them with people that maybe people do know, but that it's an interesting clash of styles that will provide a entertainment to the fans. And I think that's one of the areas that the UFC has forgotten, is that the entertainment is the fighting. The entertainment isn't the embedded. It isn't the Twitter. It isn't the Instagram. It isn't the post and pre-fight press conferences. It's the fighting. And if you're not paying attention to making the fighting entertaining, nobody cares about the rest of it, really.
Yeah, it's true. And I think we're starting to see that more and more. But let's get into it. As we talked about off the top, we lost the main event. Hopefully Derek Lewis is okay. This can get rebooked and added to one of these shows over the coming month so that we're not waiting an extended period of time to see these two fight, because I do still think it is a interesting, compelling fight. It led to the main event being Kennedy Nzechukwu and Iwan Cutelaba. Nzechukwu wins second round TKO a minute in a fight where the first round is almost all Cutelaba. He hurts Kennedy right out of the gate, or stuns him right out of the gate, gets into the wrestling, gets into the grappling, kind of controls him. Kennedy makes the right decisions and does the right things, fighting in front of his corner and following direction from the general safe side quite well. And then comes out in the second round and is like, oh, right, I can do the fighting, which is really becoming the Kennedy Nzechukwu sort of pattern. And it feels to me, and I would really love your thoughts on this, it feels to me like we're seeing his growth and evolution and development and understanding of things each time out, because it feels like he's got to go through the process and get into it and realize, oh, right, this is actually the fight, and I need to do the actual fighting things once he gets in there. And there are good things. He makes the right decisions in defending the grappling exchanges and fighting the hands and clearing the hands and all of those things. When he does throw and he does get aggressive, we're out of here in a minute and 2 seconds. But it takes that time, and it feels to me like someone that is just, it's a baby deer learning to walk is what it is to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think something that we forget because of his age and his size and his stature and whatever is that was his 14th fight. His 14th professional fight. And when you look at a man like Kennedy and you think about the way he fights, you can see, if we look, I'm just going to pull up his record here. So he's had 14 fights. The last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
More than half of them are in the UFC.
The last 9 of them have been under the UFC banner or under a banner that's related to the UFC in Dana White's Contender Series. That's fucking wild, like. And to think that man is learning on the job in, yes, not a mineral-rich division by any stretch of the imagination, but a division where you still can't make that many mistakes because there's lots of big hitters. And mistakes mean years off your life, and mistakes mean big concussions, and mistakes mean less paychecks at the end of that fight. So for Kennedy, I think one thing that will save him is the thing that impresses me the most is that he has a willingness to learn. And you see that in the cage when his coach is barking orders at him, he listens and he follows. And he's not wrapped up in the occasion of being in a bad position under the bright lights, that it overwhelms him and that he feels the need to revert back to the foundational fibers of his being, which is something we talk about all the time. But instead, what he does is he's cerebrally aware to be like, oh, okay, I'm in a bad spot. I'm receiving the right information. Let me just trust in the information because this is something that I've done before and has worked out well. And that's something that he will take away and he can watch again and he can see why the takedown happened to begin with and why his feet were out of alignment and why he wasn't able to down block Cutelaba effectively and why the single leg turned to the position that it did. And, you know, the myriad of mistakes that were made to force him to have to do the things and explode up and everything else, he'll be able to go back and watch and reflect and drill those things out in the gym. And that is exactly what you want from a fighter. What you want from a fighter is somebody who's willing to listen, somebody who's willing to self-critique, somebody who's willing to learn. And Kennedy looks like he has all of those things. Now, there is a portion where that man takes hellacious shots, and that chin takes significant punishment. And there's a question as to how long that lasts. But that is yet to be seen, and we've seen no evidence that it's going to let up anytime soon. So, yeah, if you're going to react in the second round like Ion Cutelaba reacted, which was, oh, I've done some really interesting and good things in this first round. So what I'm going to do is throw all of that out the window and press the mad bastard button and get knocked out. Kennedy will give you that for sure.
Yeah, if you listened to him after the fight, if you saw him post-fight, I've had the pleasure of speaking with him a number of times. He is very much a preaching patience, preaching experience gathering, information gathering, learning. Hey, we're going to get there. I don't know that it's get there to a championship level, as you said. Take some big shots, and the further up that ladder you go, those hitters become even better. They don't do the we're going to press the mad bastard button and throw the good work out the window. They stick on the good work, and then you're just beat. As we've seen, like, he's lost some fights, right? There are moments where you can just get caught, as happened in his UFC debut, where he's doing well throughout, and then just doesn't recognize while he's on the ground with Paul Craig that Paul Craig is not a guy you want to be messing around with down here, gets caught. But I do think there is still upside and there is still intrigue. And he is one of those fighters for me. And as I acknowledged throughout the week, as Biggie makes his weekly appearance in the background, there's probably a little bit of, it's not bias, but I will give them more. I will give Fortis MMA fighters more rope because I have relationships there and recognize the process. I recognize the work that they've done in building and developing these fighters. And as you said, I recognize that 10 of Kennedy Nzechukwu's 14 professional fights have been in the UFC or UFC affiliate programming. And that's a tough ask. That's a hard road. And so this is a good win. It's a good performance. There are building block pieces. I do think, similar to his teammate Ryan Spann to a lesser degree, they are both starting to put it together, and we will continue to see better of them each time out.
Very possible. I mean, I don't give rope to anyone. And I don't give rope to anyone because I don't really know who trains with who, and I don't think it necessarily helps or matters to me personally. Like, I watch fights with the view to just watch them and to see what happens from minute 5 to second 0 and what happens from minute 5 to second 0, minute 5 to second 0, and then again and again if there's a 5-round fight. I think what's interesting to me with Kennedy, and the reason why I mentioned the relationship with the corner, is because inside those minute 5 to minute 0, you can hear the instruction and you can see the bodily reaction change from Kennedy, from one of not unknowing, but more just, oh, okay, I know what I'm doing now because I've received my instructions. And then immediately after the finish, he sort of gives a nod to the corner and points the finger to be like, that's right, motherfuckers. You gave the instructions and I did the fighting, and now he's on the floor and I'm standing.
Yeah. We move forward to what became the heavyweight co-main event. Waldo Cortez Acosta defeats Chase Sherman by unanimous decision, 29-28 twice and 30-27 once. Normally, we would just give this one of these. But the thing I do want to say, and look, this is going to sound very self-serving, because let's be honest, it is that Wednesday I said, are we really doing this again? Have we still not learned? Don't stick these in the middle of the main card. We've talked about it at great length on this show, on the preview, and my forecasting during the week was that we're going to move along and things are going to just be feeling like they're going all right. And the idea of this fight, we all understand. Somebody goes in, lands a big bomb, away we go. We continue with the excitement and the highlights. But more often than not, what we get is nobody lands the big bomb, and we get into the very tired men throwing very few shots. And that's exactly what we got. That's really all there is to this. Like, fine, Waldo Cortez Acosta gets another win. Beating Chase Sherman does not hold any value to me. The man is 3-10 in the UFC. That needs to be, and I don't say this in a I want him to lose his job, but if you are holding yourself out, and I think this ties to what we were talking about off the top. If you are the apex of the sport, if you are the pinnacle, guys can't be 3-10. You can't just be running out. Like, we talk about, people misuse the word journeyman all the time. Now we're getting into jobber fucking territory. Now we're getting into not quite squash match, but pretty goddamn close to squash match territory. And it applies to Kutalaba too, who is now 5-9 in the UFC. Like, when you start getting that far under 500, we can't keep just rolling you out here, man, and not in these spots. And so hopefully, fingers crossed, the matchmakers figure out that these fights need to move further down the card, because a lot of people still equate main card with best fights, even though we know that's not always the case. And if you keep doing this, you're sending the wrong impression and you're killing the momentum of cards.
Well, this just reverberates back to our original point, right? And that is that this was, and actually this kind of goes against what one of my points was, but I'll back it up with a slightly different point. And that's that, look, in this fight, I think the expectation from the UFC was that Waldo Acosta goes out, flatlines Chase Sherman. Sherman, once again, is unfortunately on the end of a horrific finish. And at the end of the day, if you're Chase Sherman, what are you going to do but take this fight? Nobody outside of the regional scene is going to pay you 10-10 or whatever he's on. I see no way that Sherman doesn't take this fight. I see no way that Sherman probably gets another shot in the UFC when some other heavyweight fight falls out and they're going to call him in 3, 4, 5 days notice because they know he'll take the fight. And unfortunately, I think the wider audience don't really know who Chase Sherman is. You know, like, they go in, they see Waldo Acosta, they see Chase Sherman. And I think what the UFC wanted was, as we've already talked about, to use Chase Sherman as a body for Waldo Acosta to highlight reel. It didn't go that way. It was a 3-round decision and, you know, it was a heavyweight fight, whatever. But if we look at Charles Johnson versus Zalgas, which was, okay, a split decision, but an interesting, fun fight that had lots of action and had some really interesting grappling exchanges and went back and forth and was an interesting, tough, close fight. Why not put that there? Why not put Jack Della Maddalena there? Now, okay, he's opening the main card. That's fine. But for quality, it was a far, far, far more significant matchup. But I think that it goes back to what we were saying earlier about entertainment. To the UFC, something that can fit in an Instagram story, or something that can fit in a TikTok reel, or something that can fit in a Twitter post is entertainment. Because that's what drives the social media retention. That's what drives ad revenue. That's probably one of the metrics that ESPN is looking at and leaning toward as to whether that deal is renewed. So when that impacts the way in which you're creating fights, you're going to get, and we're going to get in the future, cards like this and fight placements like this.
And the last thing I will say to it, because I did do the numbers, as we recall, a couple of weeks ago. So far, of these 10 or 11 heavyweight fights that have been stuck on the main card between this level of heavyweight, just one was finished in the first round. And it was the first one of the year. Jake Collier submitted Chase Sherman. And everyone since has been some version of this. And so hopefully those metrics show that when we do this, people are less interested, so let's stop doing this. Move to the welterweights. Muslim Salikov defeats Andre Fialho by spinning wheel kick and punches 1 minute and 3 seconds into the third round. A good bounce back win for Salikov, who was stopped by Li Jingliang last time out. A second consecutive loss for Andre Fialho, who at one point was viewed as a potential top 15 guy and then ran into some legitimate competition, and we've seen where that has gotten him. This, to me, in watching it, played out as a tale of two fights and a very stark difference between an athlete that has 5 good minutes and a guy that's ready to go 15, even though he's 38 years old. And the guy that was ready to go 15 found his gear, found a home for his shots in the second round, and then just straight up got him out of there as soon as he was hurt and knew how to pick his spots, but also stay on the pressure, get that stoppage, and then draw just the most egregious, hey, why are you stopping this face that we've seen in a long time from Andre Fialho. What were your thoughts, good sir?
So I still am not entirely off the Fialho bandwagon. I mean, I wasn't on the bandwagon to begin with, as we talked about, and as is publicly available on the Severe MMA preview show hosted by Ian O'Neill, O'Neill MMA, on the Twitters and the Instagrams. And that's that, look, he is a fighter that at his bare bones, and especially when he's going forward, can do very interesting things. I've written here at the end of my round 2 notes, I've put in big caps, Andre Fialho only has energy if his feet are going forward. And round 1, I thought Salikov did a great job of managing the range for the most part. He did a good job at making Fialho cautious because of the spinning attacks, whether that be a back fist or a spinning back kick or whatever it is. I thought that the takedown was strange from Salikov. He sort of jumped on a single leg, more as a, I would not like to be in range of you throwing big shots, so I'm going to do this, and we're going to see whether we can cause a reset here. And Fialho's defense was strange. He sort of like jumped a knee, expecting Salikov to let go, who then didn't, who then round in a circle, not really running the pipe, but running the pipe. And then Fialho sat down. And then some of the decision-making from Fialho was just a little strange. Like, he did a really good job of framing on the shoulders, getting some space, getting his knees and shins across the hip line of Salikov, which is exactly what you want to try and get up. But then instead of putting a post out and dragging himself back towards the cage and getting up, he just throws an elbow. I'm like, what? Why? Why did we do this? Like, you've taken a couple of shots already. That one elbow isn't going to equalize this position, isn't going to change that you're losing this segment of this round. Why not just get up and do the fighting again? And it's decisions like that that are sort of systemic through this card, and we're going to talk about sort of the overarching nature of the fight IQ through this card. In the second round, I wrote here that, all right, the footwork has gone almost already from Fialho, who is no longer bouncing, but is walking or plodding, if you will. Salikov is working the body really, really well. Fialho goes for a low kick, stays in the pocket, and Salikov responds to the sight of the throwing of the low kick with a really, really beautiful spinning back fist, who hurts him and then leaps in with a nice jumping left hook. And I think for Salikov, the thing that impressed me the most is just the patience, right? He said in the post-fight press conference that he knew that Fialho was really strong and really explosive in the first round and wanted to do his best to sort of drain some of that energy and drain some of that pop and take some of those shots, but make sure he was landing in his zone. And I thought his investment to the body was testament to that. And then in the second and the third, it looked like a completely different fighter. Now, I don't think that that's to say that he can't do it, that Fialho can't do it. I've written for my third round notes that toughness does not beget cardio and smart fighting. Fialho is tough, and is good when the swings are in his direction and favor. But when it's not, there's not enough cardio to turn the tide or what seems like the will to change things up. Whereas Salikov is happy to be the nail for portions of fights, knowing that he's got an ace card. Now, Salikov himself isn't a fantastic fighter, right? He's good at what he does, and he does what he does well. But outside of forcing you to fight at his range and his pace and his cadence, and then landing big spinning things, there's not a lot there from Salikov. And I think that's the worrying thing for me from Fialho is sort of a trident of worries. The first is if he's moving backwards or he's in any way, shape, or form the nail, he doesn't like it and there's problems. If he's not winning the exchanges, there's problems. And if it goes past the first round, there's problems, you know? So I think the first one is very easy to fix, right? You just make sure that you're pacing yourself a little better, and we're maybe choosing to keep our elbows tighter and throwing straight shots rather than just winging shots and, you know, wasting energy. The other is just improve the cardio, right? Like we can make sure that those two things are happening. And then the second two, those are the things that I think are more mental. And those are the things that I think need more attention and that are going to be harder to fix for Fialho.
Yeah. And I don't want it to sound like I'm completely out, because look, he's now lost to a pair of guys that are just outside the top 15, very much in that second 15 that we talk about regularly, in Jake Matthews and Muslim Salikov, and are more well-rounded, more have all those things that don't have any of the elements of the trident that you're worried about with them. And he is still on the right side of 30. I believe he's 27, 28 years old. And so these things are certainly fixable. He would not be the first and will not be the last fighter that goes up into the not quite top 15, but close, realizes he's not ready to hang there yet, and has to take a step back and reset and make some changes in order to get there. I'm not sure if he gets there, but that's why we continue to watch and what we'll look for in the next matchup. And to me, that's going to be the really interesting thing. It shouldn't be a layup to get him a win, to get him moving in the right direction. It needs to be a competitive, a dangerous possible fight where if he wins, it's because he's done the right things and he's made some adjustments, or he's done well in the first round being the hammer and just gotten out of there. It shouldn't be back to fighting Cameron Van Camp.
Agreed. How about, and I know that this is probably not the fight, how about Ian Gary?
So outside of, I believe, being in the same gym, I'd be all for it.
Oh, are they in the same gym?
I believe Andre Fialho is a Kill Cliff guy as well.
Oh, that sucks.
So that would have been, that would have been lovely, because Ian Gary would have had to worry about that first round big hammer, but Andre Fialho would have had to worry about Ian Gary in general, but knows how to avoid the hammer and come and get you in the second and third. But something like that to me is correct. The right sort of fight, an ascending fighter that needs a little step up, that is going to push you, that is a test. Someone in that Ian Gary range. We'll workshop this and let people know once we put this out. We'll tag it onto the tweet that comes out with this later. Sticking in the welterweight division, Jack Della Maddalena gets a first round stoppage win over Danny Roberts. 3 minutes, 24 seconds. This was, not only was this all the things that Francisco Trinaldo should have done instead of exhibiting terrible, terrible fight IQ when he had Danny Roberts hurt. This was Della at his best. This was all the reasons that people are high on Jack Della Maddalena. This was a lovely performance. Just through and through, start to finish, no hiccups, no getting stuck in Darce chokes. Lovely performance. You're making a face at no hiccup. When I say no hiccups, I don't mean that it was flawless. This wasn't Mortal Kombat flawless victory, but like, it was pretty clean.
So the critique I'm going to make of Mr. Maddalena is going to seem is going to seem horrendously brutal, but
I can't wait.
I'm only making it because of how good the rest of it was, right? I think
I'm only telling you this because I love you.
Correct. Help me to help you, you know? Look, the thing that I didn't like was there was a moment of mental complacency in this. And that moment of mental complacency was when Della Maddalena had just had an exchange with Danny Roberts, and I think he'd cracked him, not to a point where Danny was wobbled or anything, but just caught him with some nice stuff. And then Danny Roberts immediately goes to sort of a blast double, and Della he reacts, and he reacts well, but he doesn't look like he was expecting it to happen, you know? And in the preceding exchanges, he won the exchange, but took some shots. And whereas up until that point, it was all move my feet, move my head, land my shots at an angle, go to the body, go to the head, land my leg kicks, make sure I'm being as various as possible, make sure I'm not getting hit, make sure I'm doing all the body punching, make sure I'm doing all the striking. There was just a moment, maybe a 15-second period, where he took a couple of shots, Roberts throws that double leg, and Della Maddalena was like, oh, shit. Yeah, okay. There's some wrestling things that could happen here. And now he defended the takedown fine. You know, there was no problem with it. He didn't get put on his butt. There was, he did all of the things that he should have done, and he dealt with it nicely. And then obviously we know that the finish was what it was. But we know that we've seen that mental complacency before with Ramzan Ameev. And the reason why I'm bringing it up again is because there's a pattern forming. Once is a mistake, twice is a choice. And for me, that is the thing that Della Maddalena needs to work on the most, is being 100% focused all of the time and not falling into what I will coin as the Adesanya effect, which is being so rhythmically dependent on your fight and being, okay, I'm the A side, I know where this is going, the momentum's with me, I'm doing all the things I want, I'm doing things really, really well, this is all looking beautiful. And then the moment that starts to change, instead of just having this overarching understanding that the momentum is still with you and you're still fine and everything's grand, being able to snap immediately out of that and recognize the precursors of what's happening. Because against Danny Roberts, it doesn't mean much, right? Against, I don't know, Colby Covington, it's going to mean a lot.
Right.
You know what I mean? So use these moments, use these minute, nuanced portions of complacency to learn from, so that when the Colby Covington comes around, that we don't see it.
Clean it up now so that when the moment comes, there's no worry. Be 100% today rather than saying, look, when it matters, I'll be 100%. Fair. Fully agree. Still love this performance. Still adore.
Fucking brilliant, isn't he?
Still adore. Like, I'm going to watch this fight back today at least one more time. I love the way he mixes everything up. I love the patience in finding the finish, in getting there. It's a thing, again, I think I've started saying this regularly on this show. These are the things I would show young fighters. These are the little clips I would take of these events and of these moments and of these fights and say, now watch this. Because he gets Roberts hurt a couple different times before he gets to the finish. There's no rush. There's no over swinging. There's not even deviating from his natural inclination of work different levels, work different sides, throw both, switch stances and throw different shots. It's just, I'm going to keep being me because it's gotten me here and it will get him the fuck out of here. It's a very, very impressive thing to watch from a 26-year-old that's still in that putting it together stage.
Right. and this is exactly the point that I agree with, and that is one of the most interesting things is the overarching mental game, his overarching ability
Right.
to understand and be comfortable with the knowledge that he doesn't need to rush. And that I think within the first like 25 seconds, he'd landed the cleanest left hand right hook, a really nice low kick, and then a couple of body shots.
Within 30 seconds, you knew where this was going.
Right.
And it was, let's just see how he gets there.
And the thing that I like about him is a potential danger, right? But also in fighting, probably isn't. Is he went in there and it just seemed that he had absolutely zero respect for Danny Roberts whatsoever. And I don't mean that in a personal sense or anything like that. He went in, and whilst he made sure he moved his way out of shots that were coming back for the most part, he was doing so as if it was an annoying fly.
Yeah, he wasn't particularly arsed about anything. It was just like this. It's that understanding of, and we see it at times, right? We see it on the fly in fights.
Yeah.
Of you get hit a couple times and you're like, oh, this guy can't put me out. That's the best he's got. So I'm just going to walk through. We saw it in the Zhang Weili Carlos Esparza fight. She has zero respect for what Carlos throwing her way and is like, cool, go ahead and hit me with your overhand right. I can eat that and still get in and do what I want to do. And I think he watched the last couple Danny Roberts fights and was like, yeah, well, whatever this guy has, we're fine. It, again, to your earlier point of the mental and the just be sure now, that's the one that can cost you down the road. Because you'll watch Colby Covington and go, oh, well, I could take his shots. And then he's going to clip you with one.
Yeah. And this is kind of where I think it's beautiful that he has so much confidence in himself and his ability to take shots. And like I said, he didn't go in and just eat shots and was like, yeah, it's fine. I've got this. It was even though I'm going to move out of the way of these, if they hit me, I couldn't give less of a fuck. And that to me is a really strong part of his game, because he's just like, I don't mind what this guy has because I'm going to do me. And part of me is superior head movement and footwork. So that when he meets whoever it is, right? Gilbert Burns or the Jorge Masvidal or the Leon Edwards or the Kamaru Usman or whoever it is, right? When he meets that person, we can be confident that he's not going to go in there and just look to eat shots to land shots. He's going to smartly approach the fight. However, as we said, it kind of does amplify that there may be a little overconfidence bordering on delusion, which we've talked about all fighters need, when it comes to it actually doesn't matter because me is enough. And then when we get to the portions where Roberts lands, Jesus, my English is fucking horrendous today. When it gets to the portion where Roberts does land a few shots and does get to the wrestling exchanges, and Della's just half a second behind, it is in those upper echelon fights that is going to cause problems.
We move to the flyweights. We mentioned it earlier. Charles Johnson, split decision win over Zhao Zhumagulov, who apparently announced his retirement after the fight. Was just like, I'm done. Fuck these judges. I'm out. This fight had a bunch of fouls, had a bunch of points where we could have taken points away, had Charles Johnson trying to stomp out a dead foot at one point in the third round after getting kicked in that common perennial nerve that just instantly makes your foot go numb. A weird fight, an entertaining fight at that. Kind of the fight I expected and the fight I needed to see from Johnson to sort of really truly set, for me, an understanding of where he fits in the division. The intro against Makayev is what it is. These things happen. Now he goes out, he beats Zhumagulov, who, as we talked about on the preview show, sort of that may be better than his record suggests, but maybe not, and just a decent fighter that'll give you some challenges. Johnson gets the win. We know where he fits now. Zhumagulov, thank you for your service. As Sean Sheehan would say, I look forward to your next one.
So I do think that Zhumagulov has probably been done dirty in some of those fights.
100%.
They're very, very close fights.
Yes.
And they absolutely could have gone either way. And I think that that speaks to just the way that he fights, right?
Yes.
He's an extremely forward-facing fighter with a heavy reliance on pace and a heavy reliance on being able to outgas his opponents. He hits hard for flyweight, but not hard enough that that pace and the overwhelming pressure that he tries to bring is then going to accumulate to put people away, right? He also is easily hittable, and I think he tries to counter that with the pace, right? He tries to make somebody so worried about what's coming is that actually what happens instead is they don't throw anything. But that's not the case here for Charles Johnson, who was using his range really, really well. Now, on the fouls, I mean, this is a Zhalgas Zhumagulov fight, right? You don't get through it without him faking a poke or taking a dick kick or landing an eye poke or whatever it is. The eye poke in the first round wasn't an eye poke. It was a glove. I think the shot in the second to the nuts was a shot, but you know, we've seen guys take shots like that and continue on. Obviously, there's no need for him to do that. I'm not advocating for him to not take the time he needs if he is fouled. And I do think he has a case to be a little bit upset about some of those decisions, if I'm honest.
100%. The Jeff Molina fight. Ridiculous. We said it on the preview show. Jeff Molina thought he lost the fight.
Yeah.
They were announcing the scores, and Jeff was crestfallen and went to turn and walk away. And whoever the referee was raised his hand, and he had this look of like, I won that fight? Okay. Yeah. And so then you feel like this is 2 in a row. I get it.
However, I really enjoyed it. I thought we got to see Charles Johnson show a bit of the defensive wrestling that he actually does have. Zhalgas is a pretty good wrestler, you know, clearly not to the level of Muhammad Mukayev, and that's fine. I don't think many people are in that division, but we got to see him show that he can compete. And I think that was the most interesting thing here, that he dealt with the pressure and he dealt with the big overhand right, and he tried to maneuver his way through them. Could he have made better choices? Yes, of course he could, you know, without a shadow of a doubt. But I do feel like we got to see the strengths of both of those fighters' games. And for that, I enjoyed the fight. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, we've talked a lot in the last couple of weeks of placeholder fights and fights that just aren't necessarily going to have a great big impact on the division, but are going to be entertaining, are going to be enjoyable. This is one of them, as was the final prelim. Jennifer Maia defeating Marina Moroz by unanimous decision. The veteran uses her veteran savvy, her superior overall skill set to beat the ascending fighter who maddeningly key eyes with every single shot she throws, which the homeboy Biggie just did not like. He came in to hang out with me for a little bit watching the fight. And as soon as Marina Moroz started with the audible key eyes with every shot, he was like, nah, I'm out. This is just a good win for Jennifer Maia. It affirmed what I sort of thought going in. I'm happy as a punter to have put out the Jennifer Maia as an underdog is very much worth your money, because those tickets cashed. I mean, another one of those, okay, we learned a little something fights, but doesn't really have a huge impact overall on the division.
I don't know is the honest answer. Like, this is the UFC at the end of the day, and this is the UFC who, again, whilst I feel like in a regular promotion, this is the case that Maia took a bit of a steep decline in terms of some of her results. It wouldn't shock me if we see Maia now go in against a far bigger name, and if she gets a win, is going to be talked about in title contention again. And I think the other thing that I'll say, and I'm going to critique us on this, is
how dare you?
When a fighter goes out and has a title shot and loses, what we say is, well, they should go back and they should fight somebody at the very early starts of the top 15 or the top 10. And if they win, then that's fine, and they get another shot. So actually, this is very divisionally relevant, because Jennifer Maia a couple of fights ago lost her title shot, then took a little bit more of a stumble. That's fine. And now is here on her rebuild to the title shot. If Marina Madrose had come out and won this fight and didn't look like winning the fight until maybe the third round, when she was 2 rounds down and had to bite down on the mouthpiece a little bit, and we'll get into what actually happened in a second, I think you're looking at Marina Madrose and you're saying, well, Jennifer Maia had a title shot 3 fights ago.
Right.
So I do think this was divisionally relevant. And whilst it wasn't a barn burner and it was an okay fight, it was fun enough to watch, I think that this, to me, was far more relevant than some of the other fights on the card.
For sure. And so I'll clean up my statement and say that I think this fight is a harbinger of what Jennifer Maia's next year looks like. She is going to be, I think she, in this fight, became, who am I going to use as the comp here? Who's the appropriate comparison? She became the Neil Magny of the flyweight division. She is going to be the one that faces the Erin Blanchfields, the Macy Barbers, the Casey O'Neill when she's healthy and ready to return. There's a fight coming up next weekend, so two Saturdays from now. Tracy Cortez and Amanda Hebos. She's facing the winner of that fight. And if she beats 1 or 2 of those, I think she moves back up into facing the Lauren Murphys and maybe Tyler Santoses of the world. But I think I think there's enough talent ahead of her that she now resides in that Neil Magny zone of, you're facing the veterans around the same position as you and a lot of the upstarts. And this is how you're going to continue to try to make your case, which is important. And so, as you said, it is important in that regard, much more so than a bunch of these fights. It was a good performance. I know our guy IO tweeted out during the fight that it was annoying to him that Jennifer Maia has seemingly done a Damian Maia and abandoned her grappling. And it's just like, no, we're just going to bang this out. She had success, but we're missing a piece. And it's a good piece. It's the piece that led her to win a round from Valentina Shevchenko.
I didn't understand it either. Like I've written in my notes at the start of every round, please can we see some grappling here? And that's not to say that, Marina Madrose doesn't know what she's doing, but this is mixed martial arts, right? And surely the way that you win a fight is by going in and playing to your strengths and following the path of least resistance. Like that to me is the smartest way to win a fight. And if, as Jennifer Maia, you had an overarching grappling advantage, well, then use it. We're going to talk about Vanessa Demopoulos in a little while. And for all the thoughts about Vanessa Demopoulos, she realized early on that she had a grappling advantage. And she went and she used that grappling advantage and she used it to good effect. And that's how she won her fight, bar the last minute or so of the third round. But for Jennifer Maia, I do wonder whether some of this was her working on things that she's done in the gym, because she looked, I think my first note, the first line of my round 1 notes are, it's already obvious that Jennifer Maia is far more fluid on the feet than Marina Madrose. Marina is far too stiff and she's throwing with far too much setup. Whereas Maia was just happy to bound in and out of the pocket, land the right hand. She learned very early on that she was the harder hitter, was landing with the more impactful strikes. And so she just used that right hand over and over and over again, whether it was a counter to something Madrose was throwing. I thought Madrose looked a little bit slow. I thought that Madrose was very tactically aware of the takedown coming. However, it never did, but was very aware that she wanted to keep this on the feet. And it turned out to be a horrendous matchup for Marina Madrose, who wasn't able to go to her own strengths of keeping somebody away with the stiff jab and the right hand and the movement and some of the kicks. It just felt as though you were watching an outside of the top 15 fighter fight a top 15 fighter in a far more dense division, where They just don't have the skills or the efficacy that somebody inside the top 15 does. And whilst I thought the third round, Marina Moreau stepped on the gas a little bit and made it a bit more of a dogfight, if you're going to do that, you have to do it early. Right? You have to invest early. And my spotlight this week was on George Hardwick, and George Hardwick invested from minute one into the body of Chris Bongard, and it paid dividends. He finished him with a liver shot KO, right? And I think if you're Morose and you're going to invest in the idea that you're going to be able to outdog your opponent, you have to do that from minute one.
Yeah, it can't be, I know she's going to get tired and I'll be able to get her in the third. You have to aid in her getting tired. You have to force that tired to come on. Like Jennifer Maia is going to slow regardless because she is now fighting at this breakneck pace where she's not getting the rest that she gets in grappling positions and things like that. But you can expedite the process of her getting tired by just being there a little more. And I think this was, as you said, a fighter who just wasn't quite sure she belonged at this level, taking too long to realize I could probably be at this level, because there are good things that Marina Moreau does. And she has overall looked good. One thing I do think would help her is just being more active. Yes, this was her second fight this year, but it's only her fourth fight in like 4 years. So more fighting, less Instagram, less IG, less Playboy. Stick with the fighting. Although those things are probably paying way more than fighting. So who knows? Move forward to the bantamweights. Miles Johns gets a unanimous decision win over Vince Morales. For me, it's a just pause and wait and see with Miles Johns. I was interested to see what he looked like this time around. First fight with Glory MMA, didn't have James Krause in the corner, had his father and his two brothers. It's a fine performance. It's a good get back in the win column after getting choked out by John Castaneda last time out, but nothing more than that. It is a hold position performance for Miles Johns for me.
I wasn't impressed with this fight at all, really. I thought that neither threw enough. I don't think either committed enough. And it felt to me as though Miles Johns realized that he probably had more in the power department and that he was just going to wait for Morales to commit and catch him mid combination. Morales never committed, at least not in significant periods. I thought Johns looked better in the grappling department, but then just didn't really go to it enough. I just thought both of them didn't do enough here. Both of them didn't really show enough. Both of them didn't go out and grab the fight and take hold of it and win the fight. Obviously, Johns wins the fight on the judges' scorecards, right. But in the tangible watching of the fight, neither of them really grabbed it. Both of them went in there to not lose.
Yes,
and Johns managed to not lose.
And I think that's both for these two individuals specifically and for various fighters writ large, a thing we're continuing to see. There's sort of that, it's a weird dichotomy, right? Some fighters go out there and it's just pure mad bastardry. Iwan Kutilaba, Chase Sherman willing to take whatever punishment is thrown his way. Sorry, had to clear my throat. And then we also see the Miles Johns and Vince Moraleses of the world that are going out there to, I don't want to get put on a highlight, and it's better for me to stick outside and win these little decisions than catch a beating. I think the UFC leans more towards go out and catch your beating and we'll be fine with it than you losing these sorts of fights, to even where if you win this sort of fight, the guy that caught the beating is probably in better standing because at least he went out and caught a beating. And so it's going to be interesting to see with different athletes going forward. I think there's a little bit of Miles Johns has been finished twice in the UFC. And so there's probably a little bit of like, I didn't like that feeling very much. and I don't want to experience that anymore. And so, like I said, a hold steady for me. We see where we go after that. Speaking of people doing mad bastard things, Ricky Tercios got back to being Ricky Tercios. Wins a split decision over Kevin Natividad. 29-28 across the board, 2 for Tercios, 1 for Natividad. I said it during the fight. This is the Ricky Tercios I saw in The Ultimate Fighter. This is the guy I saw on the Contender Series against Boston Salmon and fighting before that on the regional circuit. Look, it's dangerous. It's risky. He got hit with a lot of shots, but good Lord, he just keeps coming and there's no stop. And it's just, he's every single position is moving. And in a way, as much as there are defensive, like serious defensive gaps that I don't want young fighters to be coached up on, just the sheer movement and the activity of Ricky Tercios at all points in time is a thing that I think we need to see more of from more athletes. You can learn a little something from this lunatic if you also understand that we have to be more defensively responsible than this.
It's Tim Elliott with long hair, isn't it?
I put it out when he was doing his post fight of he's a combination of like Diego Sanchez, the coach from Friday Night Lights. Yeah, like it's just a combination of guys that where, oh, Johnny Hendricks, because he says, you know what I'm saying all the time. And then the coach from Friday Night Lights of Clear Eyes, Full Hearts, Can't Lose.
I don't know what that means, but
yeah, I know.
What I will say is I stopped taking notes after the first round, and I just put one line, and that was, this is just mad scrambles all over. And I think I'm going to go on a limb here, and I'm going to say I think Natividad is a better fighter than Ricky Tercios.
Yes.
Fundamentally and all in, I think he hits harder. I think his shot is nicer. But there are things, and we've talked about this before many, many, many times, is sometimes you come up against a guy and you say to yourself, I've prepared for 8 weeks and I'm going to go in and I'm going to showcase my skills against another guy who wants to showcase his skills in a sporting context. And it just so happens that the sporting context is a fist fight. Ricky Tercios says, I like doing fighting things.
Right.
And those two things are not aligned.
Yeah. You look at it as we're going to go into the octagon and have a sporting competition. I look at it as this is a fight behind the bowling alley that just so happens to be right here.
Right. And so whilst I agree that Tercios shouldn't be getting taken down anywhere near as much as he is, he shouldn't be eating the shots that he does. He himself isn't doing a terrible job at striking. He lands and lands well. He landed well on Natividad a number of times. The reversals were great. You don't see X-Guard played in MMA very often, and he played it. And so, I think for the most part, there is going to come a time when Ricky Tercios meets somebody who can hit hard and can grapple well, and it's going to be the undoing of him. But it's a very, very difficult puzzle to solve because it's relentless pace and it's relentless pressure and it's consistent mad bastardry. And when you fight somebody, or whether you're doing anything, if you're playing chess, if you're doing anything, when somebody doesn't play to the set of rules that you believe the game should be played with, it's very, very difficult sometimes. And I think that is what Ricky Tercios poses.
The Tim Elliott comp is perfect because you look at the career of Tim Elliott, the wins and losses in the UFC are more losses than wins. But he's also the guy that Demetrius Johnson, the GOAT of the division and one of the greatest fighters of all time, looked at and was like, yeah, that was my hardest fight because it's like trying to wrestle a weasel, a greased weasel at that. And so Ricky Tercios is going to have some success. As you said, he is eventually going to run up against it. It could be the next fight. This fight made me look at that fight with Ayman Zahabi earlier this year and just be like, that is going to be such a weird anomaly on the career list of Ricky Turcios fights, because he just didn't do any of the Ricky Turcios things. And if he had done some of the Mad Bastardry, maybe it's a very different fight. But we shall see. He gets the win. He moves forward. Away we go. On to Team Kyte's Vanessa Demopoulos, getting a unanimous decision win over Maria Oliveira in a fight where, as you said, Demopoulos identified very early on that she has an advantage on the ground. So let's get there. The other part of it to me, and we saw it again, this isn't like, hey, pat myself on the back. I think a lot of people recognize it and we can see it play out. In the first 2 rounds, Maria Oliveira doesn't use her reach advantage very well. She doesn't throw enough volume to really keep Vanessa Demopoulos at bay. And like, look, Demo gets credit for the way she's able to create situations for herself. I don't want this to be a like, it was just because the other person wasn't doing enough. But in general, it's single shots. It's not that much coming. And so Demopoulos is able to find a way inside. And then in the third, Maria Oliveira is like, right, if I just come at this girl and beat the hell out of her and throw a lot of volume, she can't necessarily do a lot of stuff because she's got to deal with these here hands. So a good win for the little monster to get to 3 straight victories in the UFC. A learning experience, a learning moment for Maria Oliveira, who still feels to me like somebody that can potentially put some stuff together, but we saw the flaws and we saw the thing that needs to get worked on the most, I think, here in this fight.
Yeah, so for Vanessa Demopoulos, the striking's pretty bad. And what I mean by that is just like fundamentally bad. She moves in straight lines. The head movement feels as though she's shadowboxing rather than actually moving her head away from real strikes. And I don't mean that to be, disrespectful. We've talked a lot about pad fighters and all of this sort of stuff before, but I think that there is moving your head away from shots that your coach is throwing at you for you to react in a certain way. And then there's having had experience of people in the gym throwing shots at you that you actually have to move your head out of the way of. And especially if you're moving backwards consistently, that's going to cause you problems and you're going to get clipped a lot. And she did get clipped a lot. I think that Oliveira used her range fine. I think it's the volume part that I agree with the most. That in the first round, she was cracking Demopoulos, who wasn't able to really fire back other than a couple of right hands that she took some shots to land some shots. And then there just was nothing. There was vast swaths of Demopoulos moving around, trying to find a way inside, and Oliveira hitting air for a while, Holly Holm-esque air, and Michelle Waterson throwing, where you throw at nothing in the hope that somebody runs onto it. And then eventually Demopoulos was like, oh, I can do the grappling things. And then just ran Oliveira over the cage, dumped her right into side control, got 3/4 mount, passed a mount, landed loads of elbows, and did the things. Like, it wasn't perfect on the ground either from Demopoulos. Some of the way that she controlled mount, I think, could be a little bit better. And some of the positional exchanges could be better. But the thing that impressed me the most is when she was in the grappling positions, she prioritized damage over position.
Right.
That is something that we've called for so many months on these programs, is when you get to the positions, recognize that they're dominant positions, but remember that the judging criteria is damage. And Vanessa Demopoulos absolutely looked to land damage in any and every situation that she could. My critique is that in the last 2 minutes, when she was running around the cage like a headless chicken trying to avoid getting finished, why not just shoot the double leg?
Yeah. Where was the level change?
Where was the level change? And I think this also is Vanessa Demopoulos not having the mental clarity that maybe she should have, and this is something that she can learn from that fight. Is we saw in her UFC debut against Silviana Juarez Gomez, when she gets almost sent to the fucking shadow realm and then finds an armbar from absolutely nowhere, she has the mental clarity to be the nail and find a finish. Where was that mental clarity in this fight? You know, like
Right.
I didn't see it. I don't understand why I didn't see it. Oliveira was so focused on the strikes and specifically punching that the hips were wide open.
Yeah.
And Demopoulos didn't capitalize. But, you know, these things happen in MMA.
It's a third consecutive victory. It's a second consecutive jump into Michael Bisping's arms. He was more prepared for it this time. He expected it this time. Look, I mean, I've been critical of this woman from the get-go, but she's won 3 straight in the UFC. I don't know if that speaks to improvements from her or the level of the UFC, but we shall see what happens going forward in 2023.
Big up Captain Kyte.
Brady Heastand gets a unanimous decision win over Fernie Garcia, 29-28 across the board. He gets absolutely walloped right out of the gate. And then Fernie Garcia does the thing that Fernie Garcia should never do in those instances and is like, hey, man, I'm going to grapple with the grappler. And in every instance, he let his instinct of, no, I can hang with this guy on the ground, get the better of him. It was a good win for Brady Heastand. I think he continues to show my thoughts going in and my thoughts coming out were the same. He's got a bunch of intangibles that I really like. He's got a bunch of like the shit you can't teach people that I think is useful and beneficial. He now just needs to work on the actual like fundamentals and foundational bits of defending a little better and moving his head more and becoming a better striker and things like that. That at 23, fine, you've got time. I will give you time. I like some of the pieces. This is, again, similar to the Miles Johns thing. Great. Holding pattern. Let me see in 6 months against the next guy.
Yeah, I didn't like the fight IQ in this one either. I thought he stand? High stand?
He stand, correct.
Thank you. It was quite clearly the fundamentally better grappler. And whilst Garcia certainly wasn't doing poorly on the ground, there were moments of immaturity. You know, when he dropped him, he had a choke, right? He very legitimately had a choke. He had his arm under the neck. And he then just, instead of, I mean, this is Jiu-Jitsu 101, right? In your first class, not your first class, but in your first 6 months, you will hear position over submission, right? And the reason for that is, unless you have an unbelievable squeeze or you have a significant understanding of the submission, you're going to need position to restrict movement so that submission is available. And for Garcia, I felt like twice he made the immature mistake of having the neck, and then instead of looking to chase the position after getting half a submission, double down on the submission. And that was frustrating. Now, when he had his back taken, I thought he did a good job of defending the chokes. He did a good job of landing strikes from there. But these are situations that we shouldn't find ourselves in. You know what I mean? These are situations that we were clearly better than him on the feet. He landed the beautiful straight down the pipe 1-2 that dropped high stand early. Just do that. Just do more of that and be more of that and allow yourself to get into those situations. Now, Heastand looked big and he looked strong and he looked fast. So it may be that Garcia just didn't really know how to get him off him. But then when we're in those grappling exchanges, and you have those positions, let's be mature in our thinking. And for Heastand, I mean, he got the fight to where he wanted to get it to 3 out of 3 rounds. You can't ask for much more than that.
Agreed. Opening fight in the night, women's flyweight Natalia Silva earns a 3rd round TKO victory over Teresa Bleda. Spinning back kick to the face, to the like chin, throaty area. 1 minute and 27 seconds in, a second straight victory for Natalia Silva, who looks to be kind of somebody we really need to be paying attention to in this division, maybe not joining that pack of 4 up and comers, but just behind them, the 25-year-olds and under that we've spoken about at great length, being Aaron Blanchfield, Macy Barber, Casey O'Neill, and Miranda Maverick. A good win, a good performance. Leaves some questions that I know you and I talked about offline about Teresa Bleda, who was my fighter to watch, who I still think is a very good prospect. But this begs the question of how soon is too soon to be in the UFC and things like that. Before we get to that, your thoughts on Natalia Silva in general?
Just a better fighter, just the more well-rounded, more mature, more experienced fighter for me. There were moments where Bleda looked Bleda. Excellent. I've written my notes completely wrong. Where she looked good and she looked dominant, but there in even those positions, there were moments that we need to discuss. But for Silva, she used her strikes really, really well. After the first round, she defended the takedown well. She did the things that she needed to. She got underhook. She dragged Bleda up. She made sure that she tried to rotate the positions, and she didn't hang around in the grappling if she didn't need to. Just overall, I thought it was really, really nice. I really liked the jab. I thought she made Bleda work really, really hard in the positions that she was in. And then the timing on the back kick is just really, really, really beautiful. You know, the back kick is something that's hard to land anyway. And for people, I watched the back kick a few times. And when I watched it first, I was like, oh, she's going to the liver. And it's just so happened that Bleda has shot at the same time. But if you watch it again and watch it closely, you can see that Bleda, as Silva turns her head to check where Bleda is, she sees that she's starting to shoot, and she angles her hip just slightly lower than where she was immediately going to throw it. So to be able to chamber your kick, spin, and then in the moment see and make adjustments to land the shot is gorgeous. And I mean, it's not often that we see spinning back kicks to the dome land like that. And when we do, Lord of mercy, they're nice.
They are very nice. She earned $50,000 for that kick, as did Jack Della Maddalena for his win, Muslim Salikov for his spinning back kick, and Kennedy Zachukwu for his finish. To just get on the, to get on the Bleda part. I still stand by, like, I've been trying to do this a little more with the fighter to watch. It's not always somebody that I think is going to win. It's somebody that I want people to pay attention to both this weekend and going forward. I think there are good pieces here. She turns 21 in a couple of days. Like, we got a lot of time. She's shown some good bits and elements, size-wise, physicality-wise. I think she's interesting for this division. But as you said, there were some moments still, even in the realms where she is having success, that aren't quite clean enough or need some more polish.
Yeah, so quite clearly the grappling is where her strengths lie, and you know that's where she gets her nickname from, and all of the things. It felt to me as though she was forcing positions. And when we talk about Della Maddalena, or when we talk about some other fighters who, I said this about George Hardwick on my spotlight, is that Hardwick goes in and it feels like he doesn't have a game plan. He just goes in and he says, I have a set of skills and I'm happy to implement those skills however the situations arise themselves in this fight. That, to me, is what we should be asking as a minimum requirement for when fighters get to the UFC, male or female. Now, George Hardwick may not get the UFC call, right? I think he will. I think that's his second title defense for Cage Warriors. And he's 25, 26, you know, it's about the right time. But if he doesn't, fine. But that level of well-roundedness is something I think that should be the absolute bar to get into the UFC. Unless it's a special case like, you know, Brock Lesnar or something silly like that. When Bleda was using her wrestling, again, it felt like it was all squeeze and it was all force. Now, when she got to her positions and she was using her passing, it was good. She looked fine. Like, I didn't think she looked great. There were some critiques of the grappling that I didn't like. She was trying to get out of the half guard and wasn't tripoding and wasn't using that top pressure to really cement Silva to the ground. And, you know, I don't know why she tried the butterfly staple. But then when we get to the triangle, that's the fight over. That should have been the fight over. She had plenty of time to work. The triangle was there. And as we learned from Jake Hadley, is triangle doesn't mean triangle. Triangle means let's attack an armbar, let's smash our opponent with elbows, and let's squeeze a triangle. And then let's just see what happens. Because you're offering trilemmas. And trilemmas are better than dilemmas. And if we can get to a position where our opponent is having to think about 3 different things at once, especially in the heat of chaos like that, it is very likely that they're going to be able to dot all of their I's and cross all of their T's.
Right.
And instead, Bleder is just squeezing a triangle, and is obviously not willing to open up the triangle to adjust it to get it tighter, because why would you, right? Like the likelihood of her doing that and Silva turning her way out of it or exploding her way out of it is very, very high. So she just sits in the triangle. And that, to me, again, is a showing of the immaturity, where if she's on the regional scene against some girl that they've brought in to lose, probably,
she's throwing that triangle on and it's
done.
That's all we need. Right.
So I think that going forward, what we need from Bleder is to go away, right? And probably mix up a bit of her training and train with some UFC level or Bellator level women and go in there and feel what it's like when people won't roll over and people won't break and people will force you to play a game that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, she is somebody that, and look, when we talk about people going and training at different places, it's not, hey, your team is crap, abandon them. It's go and put yourself in the best position to learn. Put yourself in the best. I said it last week, and I can't remember who the athlete was that I said, like, look, I feel bad saying this, but that person needs to go and be at a larger gym where they're getting rounds with more capable. Like, you need to be a small fish in a big pond. You need to be, and the pond doesn't have to be oceanic. It can just be it can be one of the Great Lakes here in North America. It can be a good sized pond where there are just some fish that are bigger than you. And as you just said, aren't going to roll over when you slap on that triangle and aren't going to be like, great, you caught me. All right, we're done. They're going to be like, cool, I can get out of this. So do something next. Figure out the next chain, because I think those will be or could be the keys to her development and getting better going forward. Before we wrap, before we get out of here, you had mentioned off the top and a couple times throughout, Cage Warriors 147 Unplugged 2 transpired this past weekend. The subject of your spotlight this week comes from this, George Hardwick, who defended his lightweight title in successful fashion with the second round TKO victory. Morgan Charrier, as you mentioned, former champion, also on the card. Just give us your general, what stood out for you? Who stood out for you? Obviously Hardwick, but who are some of the other people that folks should maybe pay attention to from this card?
So the card was split up into 2, right? And we had 9 fights, 8 finishes. And this is something that's becoming systemic and something to be expected of Cage Warriors, is that a lot of these fights don't go the distance. I mean, the first 2 fights combined fight time 1 minute and 10 seconds. 1 minute and 3 seconds.
63 seconds, yeah.
63 seconds. Like, that's fucking wild.
And then we also had another 24-second finish.
We did
later on in the night.
So, I mean, I'll just quickly run through, right? Like, Milton Cabral came in and lost his Cage Warriors debut, then came in against debutant Paddy Wilkinson and picked up a good win. I thought Mush Aslani looked fantastic. He's somebody that comes from the Renegade gym. He is sort of known as a wrestler, but landed a big right hand on Adam Darby, and I thought the stoppage from Dan Motherheady was absolutely brilliant. Adam Darby was very, very, very rocked, eyes rolling back in his head, had not yet hit the canvas. And damn well the head, he called it before he needed to. And I thought it was an excellent stoppage. Matty Byfield is somebody to watch. He is 5-1 now after beating Daniel Ladero. Now, Daniel Ladero submitted Freddie Voskrone, who's a prominent European grappler, at trials, so could certainly do the grappling things. Byfield did a very, very good job of stopping the takedown and picking his shots. Eventually took the fight down himself and landed some shots and got the finish. A very, very nice performance from him. And he's slowly building quite a nice record at 5-1. Matt Bonner, this was a very strange fight. I didn't like this fight. He was fighting Alan Carlos, who was 39 and hadn't fought in a number of years and was 12-11 coming in. I don't know why Matt Bonner, who had recently won the Cage Warriors title, was fighting a man of this caliber. I put a lot of respect on Ian Dean's name for many of his matchmaking. I don't like this one. I didn't think it was necessary. Alan Carlos didn't look like he wanted to take shots. And when he did, looked like he wanted to get out of there. And Matt Bonner allowed that to happen. Round 2, Matt Bonner didn't look great himself either, to be honest. Omran Shaban versus George McManus was a fantastic fight. Omran Shaban is a guy coming out of Team KF, a Finnish guy by nature, but an honorary Irishman, as they all are. George McManus, a guy that lost to Urban Elliott, but is prominent on the grappling scene here in the UK, and just an overarching solid enough fighter. Omran Shaban impressed me with his jab and his willingness to just sort of power through adversity positions and come out on top, and he did really well there. I'm not going to try and pronounce this fella's name. Jan Quay-Hagens, I think his name is.
There you go. Nailed it.
Belgian.
Maybe Jan.
And he absolutely destroyed Eric De Silva with a flying knee. Will Curry, Michael Chamu was a good fight. Will Curry, again, lost 2 fights to Christian Leroy Duncan, and these things happen. Christian Leroy Duncan is a very, very good fighter. Will Curry, very young prospect, he's coming through and doing a great job of that. Morgan Charrier versus Daniel, I think I call him David, his name is Daniel Bazant. Great fight, really, really interesting fight. I thought both guys fought well. Charrier, I felt like, didn't really up the gears to the gears that we've seen him in the Vucenic and Hughes fights, but still went out and performed pretty well. And then George Hardwick just absolutely butchered Chris Bongard inside 2 rounds. Never really looked out of second gear. All of the variety that you want to see. Some gorgeous clinch work, some absolutely beautiful leg kicks, body shots, some really nice pressure footwork, and just destroyed Chris Bongard. So the people to really focus on coming out of there, I think Will Curry is somebody that we have to keep an eye on. Morgan Charrier the same. I think that Matty Byfield, as I've already said, and obviously I think George Hardwick should be wearing the UFC shorts next time we see him in a cage.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that, because that was going to be my question of look, it's pretty clear that George Hardwick should be there. Morgan Charrier has lost a couple of fights relatively recently, but there are 2 guys that fought a couple weeks ago that are clearly UFC caliber, and Paul Hughes, who should be there next time out, and Jordan Vucenic, who probably should be there next time out as well, but we'll probably have to do 1 more, maybe 2 more in Cage Warriors before he gets the call. Will Curry at 9-2, as you said, 2 losses to Christian Leroy Duncan, who is undefeated, has gold over his shoulder, and he's 24 years old. So keep an eye out, folks. We will touch on Cage Warriors as Cage Warriors events come up around this show. But for now, that's it. That's the end of the takeaways this week. It was a tough card. We got through it. There's always some good things to think about. There's always some good things to pay attention to. We do not have a fight card on Saturday. We are 2 weeks away to our next one, which is UFC Fight Night. UFC on ESPN, Thompson versus Holland, ESPN 42. Going to be all kinds of different naming ideas for this, but a very good fight card overall. We will certainly be previewing it going forward. I don't know what we're going to do the rest of this week. Haven't really.
We'll think of something.
We'll jump on here.
It'll probably be a preview show where we talk about stuff.
Yeah, we'll probably jump on here at some point and put some stuff out, because we like getting together and talking about fights. We hope you like it when we get together and talk about fights. Go and check out the Severe Spotlight. It is up now on the website, severemma.com. It is on George Hardwick. It is well done. As always, go and follow everything that Harry does at BJJ_Harry Powell. Sign up for the Patreon, follow the Patreon, subscribe to this YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter at Spencer Kyte. Hit us with your likes, your comments, your suggestions, your feedbacks, your criticisms, everything. We are here to hear it. We appreciate you watching. Appreciate you tuning in all the time. Take care of yourselves. Take care of one another. And we'll see you next week.